Hello and welcome to another Movie Boozer virtual pubcast. I'm your host, Ken Ekman, and joining me today is Bill Leon
It happened again?
and Bill Arsenault.
Hey, hey guys! I'm the one that's going to be talking about jizz
Well, we'll
in
get to
space today.
We'll get to that.
They will get to that.
We are saving that for the end of the show.
That'll be at the end of the show. Yeah, so stick around, folks.
Oh God, like the pages would stick together in a magazine.
Oh no!
Oh God! You ruined the magazine. Now it can't be sold for resale.
So besides talking, that will be High Life, which we'll cover later. We'll also be talking the best of Enemies, Her Smell, Missing Link. But first, we're going to talk Tooks and Fanny.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this one. I literally just found out about this movie and its Instagram account last week.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't really been following Albert Burney, the co-director and star of Silvio, one of our favorite films of the last several years.
Not to cut you off, Bill, but what was that David Lynch type of movie that you showed us of his?
The Beast Pageant.
The Beast Pageant. Yeah, I remember watching that.
Yeah, we did a live stream and where I showed two movies back to back, and one of them was The Beast Pageant, which was like a live action, weird musical.
Very Eraserhead like.
Very, I would almost say Eraserhead, and I would say a little bit of Tetsuo the Iron Man, a little bit.
So I want to say, not knowing anything about Tooks and Fanny, I just pulled up their Instagram page, and what I'm seeing here, their representation looks to me like an 80s Sierra adventure game, but
that's kind of how the movie plays out a little bit, yeah.
But sometimes it jumps out of that and it has different forms of animation. The main form of animation is that pixel art kind of thing that you get through that, what you just said, that Sierra video game entertainment thing.
It's really got that VGA screen look to it.
It definitely does. It almost has like a vertical video look to it, kind of what you would get on a smartphone.
Mm-hmm.
That's the aspect ratio, I think.
That's the thing I wanted to bring up. Is I was watching this with a friend yesterday, and basically me and him at the same time were like, "Is this entire movie in 4:3?" And it is.
Yes, and what makes it even weirder too is that from the get-go, the minute you press play, it starts off with a video, like a VHS
tracking,
auto tracking thing. So it's like, what's the context here? You know what I mean? Like, is this found footage? Like, this is a video we imported from Russia, which we'll get into in a second about the Russian aspect. But or is this like a vertical video weird core art thing?
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of all of the above.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
You know, Albert Burney is like a really cool, weird Pee-wee's Playhouse philosophy kind of guy.
Outside of him being in the Silvio suit, I don't know what he looks like. I don't
really either, honestly.
That was a suit?
No, he grew a beard for the movie.
Yeah, I just assumed he was a gorilla. I mean,
we never even really heard him talk except for grunting, and we see his eyes a little bit.
And he had his text to type machine.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I will try to keep my Silvio dick sucking to a minimum in this review, but no. The more I think about it, like, Silvio is one of the most compelling silent protagonists maybe ever.
I would say, yeah, it really was a brilliant movie, and it's in the way that it made the silent protagonist work, and the fact that the movie made you completely convinced that a dude in a gorilla costume was a fully fleshed out character. Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, Gorilla Interrupted's a fun movie, but the one thing it doesn't do is make you feel empathy for the gorilla.
Silvio tugs at your heartstrings at times.
Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely does.
Not just at times. I mean, throughout.
Yes, throughout the movie it does. I love its soundtrack. That movie.
I do too. Yeah.
Austin Leonard Jones.
I made a playlist of all of the songs I could find on YouTube. It's on the Movie Boozer YouTube account. I think it's a public playlist. You can look it up and find the Silvio soundtrack. It's really great. There's a song in the Tooks and Fanny trailer that is not in the film. That's also very reminiscent of the Silvio soundtrack.
It's a very good song. I think it's by the Homophonics or something.
Mm-hmm.
I can't pronounce their name. I think I'll have to go on my Spotify page to get it. But
either way, it was a great song.
Great song. And really, it's got a good score to it. It's very whimsical score. It's got that you know those little instruments you would play as a kid with the little
like
prongs?
the toy piano.
The toy piano. You go bing boom boom boom.
Yeah.
You know, so me not knowing anything about Tooks and Fanny, give me the elevator pitch. What is the? Give me a quick description of what this is.
All right. Before getting into spoilers, the elevator pitch. I think the quote unquote gimmick of this film is that it's mostly done in pixel art. There's some stop motion animation. There's some 2D animation, but most of the film is this pixel art, and at times especially with the scenery, it looks great. It looks fantastic most of the time.
What he's able to accomplish with the pixel art is pretty astounding, actually. There's this opening bit where you see first you see a couple screens of different colors, and then you see the sky, and then you cut to a deer just grazing. Then the deer looks at the camera, and then we see a zoom in, or a close up rather, of the deer. And this is all still pixel video game-ish kind of animation, and the deer is staring into your soul, but it's also pixelated. So it's kind of hard to gather, but you still get that it's what it's supposed to be doing, and it's pretty neat. My elevator pitch for this would be two Russian-speaking friends seek spiritual enlightenment in a video game.
I don't know that they seek spiritual enlightenment. It's more like spiritual enlightenment just kind of falls into their lap.
I don't know. I would say Tooks at least is seeking some kind of enlightenment. I would say Fanny is more content with the everyday moment to moment.
The dialogue, the character dialogue in this, I never got that either of them were seeking spiritual enlightenment. But this film is essentially, shit goes down and they take a journey through the multiverse. Is pretty much what happens in this movie.
I would argue Tooks is kind of seeking at least some kind of higher.
Maybe have you watched it twice? Because I'm only seen it the one time. So
I've seen most of it twice. I think I've seen it 1.5 times.
Maybe I need to watch it again to get that aspect of it.
Well, you didn't see it 1.25 times.
It may have been 1.25 times. Yeah, I don't know. Tooks. There's a scene in there where he. I think he has a cast on, and the cast turns into a parachute, and the wind blows him away. And throughout the movie, and before this part too, he whenever he sees something, he talks about it in such philosophical sentiments. We are much like the flower grazing in the sun, Fanny. And Fanny's more stuck in the moment. She's just happy to be around. He's kind of more. Tooks is kind of more, up in the clouds,
I think from the beginning of the movie, though, Fanny is portrayed as more of a practical character because Tooks they find a cat.
Yeah, Tooks has the wild ideas.
So as to the Russian aspect, is this in Russian or is it spoken with Russian accents?
No, it's spoken in Russian and it's got subtitles.
Okay. You need to pay attention to the subtitles at all times in this.
But they talk kind of slowly, so it's very easy.
Is the dialogue anything like if Werner Herzog spoke Russian or something?
It's kind of Herzog.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, you're not far off with that.
At least Tooks' dialogue is very much like that.
The whole thing. So they come across this cat, and Tooks is like, "We should take in this cat," and Fanny's like, "What if it has fleas?" And then it cuts to them covered in fleas, sitting on their couch.
Now Tooks gets the bright idea, however, to cover himself in peanut butter first, and then Fanny follows suit when she sees that he's soothed. And to get the peanut butter off of him, she suggests we clean ourselves with water, and he says, "No, I'm going to let these ants eat them."
Yes, and they eat his skin off.
And then she has to make him a skin suit a couple skits later.
Now, well, again, this might sound like spoilers, but this is in the first 10 minutes of the
right. We go through 3 skits within the first 10 minutes, and I say skits because it really is kind of like a series of skits with a through line.
This was a web series, and you can find a lot of it on YouTube. I think they're still uploading episodes.
Yes,
to YouTube.
They still are. And some of the clips are also on the Instagram account too. But there's a lot in this movie that isn't uploaded. There's a lot in this movie that he just finished the other day. Like when I found out about this movie, I immediately contacted him, and he told me like, "Oh, Albert Birney," and he told me, "Oh yeah, we're screening it in May, and I'm just finishing up the animation on it now. I'll hit you up at the end of the month with a preview copy." And so I messaged him the other day because he is doing a VHS release of the film.
Oh yeah,
and he's looking for essayists to write little
contribute to the liner notes. To the liner notes. It's not an album, but yeah, liner notes.
Yeah, which I'm gonna quote. Yeah, which I'm going to be contributing to. Actually, I asked him. He was like, "Yeah, go for it." And he was like, "Yeah, here's a copy of the movie, Bill. I hope you guys enjoy it." And
nice.
I was like, "Yeah, great." So, yeah,
I know I have access to view it, and so I will give it a chance as soon as I can. It's it's been a busy weekend, so I
know it's okay. It's no rush. It reminds me a lot of the 12-ounce Mouse DVD release, which was all the episodes strung together in a feature film. It's not nearly as long as 12-ounce Mouse. That ran almost like 2.5, maybe 3 hours long, and that
I have a burned copy of that.
Yeah, that was almost hard to take, but it was also equally enjoyable and satisfying. This is very satisfying.
Well, in terms of 12-ounce Mouse, I want to say like you don't want every 10 minutes to be like, "Get out of my way, I'm drunk as hell."
That's the opening song.
Okay. Out of my way, I have no idea what you're talking about there. So this is like
12-ounce Mouse, 12-ounce Mouse.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
For some reason, I'm imagining it as a Primus song.
No,
it's by 9 Pound Hammer, who did.
Yeah, they did a Carl's theme.
Yeah, Carl's
Team Hunger Force soundtrack. But yeah, no, Tooks and Fanny, man. This was a total surprise. I mean, just like Silvio kind of was. I wouldn't say this movie is as narratively polished as Silvio.
It doesn't.
But it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't lend itself to that. I think that this film is more like, let's get abstract. Let's talk about really existentialism is what this film is about.
It gets into a lot of Xavier Renegade Angel territory.
Kind of, yeah.
Like there's a bit where Fanny.
I love that. I love how every point of reference is Adult Swim.
Yeah, well, that's the closest thing we can get. It's like
the way you're describing it. I'm just getting Werner Herzog out of it. I believe the common denominator.
You can definitely
not harmony, but chaos.
Can do that. That's the thing.
As a Herzog fan, I think you will get something out of this because we're building up to how the film ends. I don't want to spoil that, so I'm sorry to cut you off, Bill. Continue.
That's okay. What I was going to say was there's a moment where Fanny gets a computer, and she's like, okay, there's this game on here, which is like a home simulator where you get to control this character, and she has a computer, and then she has on her computer another simulator in which you can do this, and it just goes further and further and further, and then eventually lightning hits her computer, and she ends up sucked into it. And so she goes on
Captain N the Game Master style.
She ends up going into a singularity trip, and starts seeing like rectangles and squares as people's heads and shit like that. Eventually, everything boils down to them losing their cat and losing their home, and they have to go on a journey down the river to the ocean to plant a tree out of a deer's skull.
In the deer you mentioned earlier, the deer that Bill mentioned earlier dies, and they take its skull and they plant a seed inside of it,
an acorn.
Yes.
Yeah, and
this is the thing.
Yeah, and what happens is Tooks has a dream, or rather a fever dream, where he sees the deer skull sprouting all these flowers and trees and plants from it.
Oh, that's a trippy fucking sequence.
And he's inspired to do this in real life.
Mm-hmm.
So after having lost everything, Tooks and Fanny are like, let's go plant this fucking deer head, deer skull with this acorn in it. And that becomes like their last journey in the movie is this mission to the ocean.
It's fair to point out this is after their house has been destroyed, so they don't have anywhere to live at this point.
They don't, yeah. And what's weird is like, too, even though it's pixel art, and it can be a little blurry at times, like the faces. There is clarity enough to where you can see tears developing in their eyes, and you can see emotion. You can see their eyebrows, go from happy to sad to angry and stuff. You can see all sorts of different things. And when their house burns down, especially when their house burns down, they're like, what do we do now? And it's kind of heartbreaking, and it's kind of like there's this void inside of you when you hear them say that, because this whole movie up until this point has been them trying to figure out what the hell life is about.
I'm imagining the Tears and Rain speech from Blade Runner.
It's almost I don't know if it's quite like that level, but there is kind of a touching sentiment to it where you're kind of like, whoa, this whole movie's been these two characters, and now they got nothing. It's like, what doth life? From Xavier, Renegade Angel.
Yeah.
Which, in a way, Xavier did a lot of stuff that you could even say was like, it pulled a lot of philosophical bullshit out of movies like Blade Runner.
The funny thing about Xavier is if you listen to the DVD commentaries, they have these like joke DVD commentaries where it's a guy explaining the symbolism of it. And I don't know if it was what the people behind Xavier intended, but like it is like he'll sit there and be like, this is about religion, and this is that, and this is that, and you're just like, what the fuck? Like, I thought this was just a goofy, silly show, but now it's throwing symbolism in my face.
Well, that's the thing about Xavier. It was a goofy, silly show, but the creators behind it definitely had a handle on the themes.
That being PFFR, correct?
PFFR, yes.
Yeah, John Lee and Company. This
was before they did Delocated and before they did John Loves Gear.
I love John Loves Gear.
Yeah. I haven't seen that show yet. I know it's on True TV, but I haven't seen it yet.
It's funny. Check it out.
Okay, anyway. I'll seek it out. I got the Adult Swim app, so I'm still waiting to wrap up. What's that? Tropical Cocktails.
For those who
Jim Hoskins show.
For those who don't know, PFFR is a collective, I guess. Like they were a band. They were a band, and now they're more of a production company. And Wonder Chosen was really
that was
like
their baby.
First,
that was
the first big thing they did, and then they ended up working with Human Giant and John Glazer and all these people. And yeah, I can totally see well, maybe I don't know if I would call it an influence, because I don't know if Albert Burney has influences. He seems like a Woody Allen type, and I don't mean that in a sexual way. Woody Allen once said,
He doesn't mean Woody Allen is sexy. He means
Woody Allen,
the harassment aspect. Yeah.
No,
or the abuse aspect. Yeah.
Woody Allen made a comment once about before he writes a script, he chooses to avoid watching television and movies just so that his script is fresh.
Okay.
That's an interview I read years ago.
These pretzels are making me thirsty.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that notion, in that he is kind of isolated, Albert Burney, from everything else, at least when it comes to making his own stuff. Someone wrote about Silvio that it was almost like it had a Pee-wee's Playhouse kind of childhood sentimentality to it. It was almost like there was this innocence, but it was also kind of subversive at the same time.
Yeah.
I would say almost more so Tooks and Fanny has that too, but it's almost indescribable in a way because of the Russian language part of it. And what makes it even weirder is it sounds like the Russian, like the dialogue has been recorded on a what do you call those those little toys where you pull down the lever and then this is the sound a cow makes.
Oh God.
It sounds like it's recorded on one of those.
Right. I don't know what those are called, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's
This
like
is the sound of a duck, quack. You know, and it's got that clicking noise that's in the background as it's moved, that motion, that motor.
It makes me think of like the Mountain Goats. If the band Mountain Goats, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but for years it was just one guy, John Darnielle, and what he would do is he would record using this boombox microphone, and so there's a huge like whirring noise whenever you listen to his early stuff. It's like wah wah wah.
It's almost like Daniel Johnston in a way, like when he started. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Almost all of the dialogue in this movie sounds like it's being run through this filter. That's what you guys are referring to.
Yeah, definitely. So you got vertical video on VHS. You got you got ADR and dialogue recorded second or third hand off of like toys, basically toy recorders. You got pixel art. You got weird philosophical existential moments that kind of make you think and feel weird and discomforting ways.
There's a great thing in the movie where excuse me, they're like, what are we gonna eat? And they're like, oh yeah, fishing is a thing. Let's fish. And then they go catch
first
fish.
they go to the apple tree, and then the apple falls, and they're like, we're happy, we have an apple. Oh, but there's a worm in it. We can't eat it. Well, this is a sad turn of events. And then Took is like, hey, wait, there's a worm in it. Why don't we use it to fish? So then they go fishing, and they have all the food they could use. And then a chicken ends up inside of his rib cage. Because remember,
this is getting into some Shel Silverstein.
At this point, he's got no skin. You know, he still has no skin. So a chicken.
Have you guys ever read like The Giving Tree?
Years and years ago. That is a Shel Silverstein, right?
Yeah. It's one of those books that's like one of the most philosophical children's books ever written, in that it's, about this kid who, finds this tree that will give him an apple, and it gives and gives and gives until it's nothing but a stump, basically.
Shel Silverstein was a very creative writer. He worked with Johnny Cash on A Boy Named Sue. I have a copy of Where the Sidewalk Ends in my closet over there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, over there.
That's a great book, by the way. Where the Sidewalk Ends is one of the best collections of poetry ever.
I love that book so much.
Cool.
Yeah, but The Giving Tree is fascinating because it's this story. It's a morality tale, and it's basically like about this tree that it gives until, the old religious saying, "Give until it hurts." Well, it's about this tree that keeps giving until it's no longer even a tree. It's basically a stump.
The kid cuts it down.
Yeah, the kid doesn't have anything left to take from the tree because it's taken everything the tree has to give.
For a comparison to Shel Silverstein, I would say that Tukes and Fanny, honestly, feels like a little bit of both. It's got that moral side of The Giving Tree, but it also has that goofy, silly, kind of Twilight Zone-y aspect that Where the Sidewalk Ends has.
Yeah.
Because, I'll give you Bill. Have you ever read Where the Sidewalk Ends?
No, I don't think so.
There's a poem in there about a kid that watches too much TV and his head turns into a TV. Like it is exactly shit like that.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like Tooks and Fanny. Something that would happen to Tooks probably.
Yeah.
Like, Fanny, I am now TV. You know what they say about TV becoming your head.
Much. Yes.
What do I do now? And Fanny's
I think it's safe to say both of us fucking love this thing.
Yeah. And he's going to Albert Burney's going to start touring with it, or at least screening it in Baltimore or somewhere in Maryland. I'm not sure where exactly. Early May, sometime next week actually. And then I guess he's going to release VHS copies of it. So,
but that's nothing against him. I know it's not cheap to manufacture VHS tapes nowadays. I wanted to buy the Silvio VHS, but they were selling it for like $50, and I, financially wasn't in the place to be spending $50 on a VHS. But also, I'm a VHS collector, so it's like I would want to open it and put it in my VCR when it's really a collector's item that should say sealed in the plastic.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, they still have not made more of those that pressing, but they still got the DVDs in the book. The book of Silvio, I guess.
That sounds like a very religious tome. The Book of Silvio.
Did they ever do like a commentary track?
I don't think so. It's got deleted scenes.
Oh, okay.
I know that, and it's got like a behind the scenes book where it's got like articles and stuff about what happened.
Can you buy that on Amazon? I'll have to look into that.
I think it's on Amazon, but I know it's on Factory 25.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I'll have to look into that.
Studio, yeah.
All right, we'll go ahead and move on then to our next item, which is because I think we've talked Tux and Fanny enough.
Tux and Fanny has a very high recommendation. It's not for everyone. It's probably unlike It's probably unlike anything I've ever seen, just because the art style and the incorporation of other art styles into it. Like Ken, I don't know if this was on the air or not, but you had brought up like Sierra Adventure Games,
right?
I think that was.
It's very similar. Like, there's no gameplay, obviously, but you see these crude pixel characters going through a character arc and a story arc, and it's fucking like...
What I'm seeing here definitely has that early King's Quest Roberto Williams vibe.
Yes. I would not be surprised at all if that was an inspiration to him.
Yeah. So, with that said, we'll go ahead and move on to another animated feature. This is a movie that I saw in the theaters, and I'm so glad, because this is a movie that might be my new favorite stop-motion animated movie from Laika, Missing Link.
Oh, really? You liked it that much?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So Missing Link is the latest stop-motion animated feature from Laika, and they've done a lot of great films in the past. I mean, Paranorman being my favorite, but any of them, even The Box Trolls, is just solid entertainment. And that's not to lessen the impact of The Box Trolls, but compared to the others, it's one of the lighter films that they've done, but it's still a solid movie. Where Missing Link excels as a movie is it's a solid buddy comedy mixed with an adventure story, and then it happens to have some of the most gorgeous animation that you've ever seen in a movie. It features voice acting talent such as Hugh Jackman, Zoe Saldana, Timothy Olyphant, Stephen Fry, and Zach Galifianakis, of course. You can't leave him out of the mix.
Who plays Bigfoot?
Well, Sasquatch, yeah, exactly.
Sasquatch, yeah.
So the plot of the movie is very simple. Basically, Hugh Jackman plays this guy named Sir Lionel Frost, who is kind of the ultimate adventurer. And Sir Lionel Frost has this thing where he's an adventurer, but he's also misunderstood because he's really into cryptozoology. He's into creatures that we believe don't exist, but exists only in legend, so to speak. And the movie opens up with this sequence where he's trying to prove the existence of the Loch Ness Monster. And he has this person accompanying him whose job is to take the photograph. And it's a comedic sequence, very slapsticky, in which, long story short, the camera gets destroyed, so he has no way of proving that this encounter with the Loch Ness Monster is real. And he has this everlasting need for approval, a quest for attention. There is very much like there's a lot of famous adventure stories that involve a British explorers club. Most recently, if you've seen The Lost City of Zed, that movie definitely covers it. But, even Around the World in 80 Days, the idea of a stuffy, cigar smoke filled room of old British gentlemen. Well, in my day, I conquered Mount Everest. That sort of thing.
The boastfulness.
Exactly. These old farts who are past their days, and the only thing they have left to sustain them is their stories of how awesome their past was. And Frost voiced by Hugh Jackman, has just this desire to be accepted by these people, and the main person in that group, who's sort of the lead of that organization, voiced by Stephen Fry, and sort of the main villain is Lord Pidget Dunsonby, who is, you know, a snobbish head of this group of great men who, you know, conquered all of these things, and they minimize Hugh Jackman and don't accept him in their organization. They sort of see him as a pariah because he's in this fearsome pursuit of creatures they don't even believe exists. And if the creature does exist, it would completely change the way science looks at the world. And so Frost, after this failed attempt to get notice by for the Loch Ness Monster, he goes back to this letter he received from a person telling him to come to Washington State in the United States because they know exactly the location of the fearsome Sasquatch. Turns out the Sasquatch wrote his own letter bidding him to come visit.
Yeah.
And the Sasquatch asks him to come for a very simple and sad reason, is that he's the last of his kind. He's lonely. And he's started to follow Sir Frost's career and realizes that the Yeti in the Himalayas on the other side of the world are sort of like a distant cousin to him. And he wants to visit the Yeti because he feels like if he goes there, then he'll find a family that he never has in the U.S. Very, deep themes we're dealing with. We're dealing with this guy who, this poor missing link kind of character who just, he's alone. And, humans fear him, and many don't even believe he exists. And he's a friendly dude. He's learned the English language through reading newspapers. And what's great, a running joke throughout the movie, is that the Sasquatch's grasp of the English language it's good, but he also has, not unlike, say, what's his name in Guardians of the Galaxy?
Drax?
Yeah, like Drax. He has no... symbolism doesn't work with him.
No.
And so anytime
Metaphor.
you say something, you use a symbol, anytime you use metaphor, he just takes you completely at face value. And it makes for a great series of fish out of water gags, but he basically bids Sir Frost to take him on this trip to the Himalayas, and, he promises that he'll come to London with him just to to help prove that he exists. And what follows is this great little adventure story because, of course, they go on this journey. Meanwhile, his villain, played by Stephen Fry, Lord Pidget Dunsby, hires a hitman basically to kill them because he knows that proof of this missing link existing would completely unmake his entire career. This is where we get the second great voice performance in this film, because Zach Galifianakis is great, but even just on equal level of amazing is Timothy Oliphant, who plays Willard Stank. He's a bounty hunter who's basically he also has this goal to be this great. He's unlike, say, Dunsonby, who's less interested in trophy hunting and more interested in just proving that he's right. Stank, his interest is in just delivering a trophy. So he wants to bring the head of his conquests to bear. And so he has no problem killing to get in the way. And so you have it unfolds like, the easiest way to describe it is if you want to combine a classical adventure movie like like Gunga Din or like I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, Indiana Jones. We'll just say Indiana Jones because that's
Okay.
easy. Yeah, combine that with a buddy road comedy like Tommy Boy.
Oh, that's a pretty unique comparison or crossover.
Because you have this thing where you have the sort of snobbish character played by Hugh Jackman and the sort of dumb but well-meaning character who would be the Chris Farley-ish. So it's like a David Spade Chris Farley relationship.
Oh,
But
okay.
I mean, obviously played for PG. This is not a PG-13 sort of movie, but it's that that mix of those two kinds of characters, and it's really brilliantly written. The dialogue is fantastic. I have to give some extra credit to Zoe Saldana, who plays Adelina Fortnite. She becomes the third wheel in the group because she was a former flame of Hugh Jackman's character, and she's got this kind of she's the one who sort of points out his contradictions in character and teaches Hugh Jackman that what his reasons for embarking on this mission are perhaps not as clear cut as he believes they were.
Yeah.
It's really, I mean, honestly, I can't recommend it enough. This is one of my favorite Leica movies, if not my favorite. When I think about it, I said it was my favorite. This and Paranorman are kind of jockeying for first place. Paranorman's a damn fine movie, and I don't want to take anything away from that. But this movie comes close, and the one thing this movie does have on Paranorman, though, is because it's a big epic adventure film, a lot of the landscape shots you get just feature some of the most gorgeous stop motion animation ever put to film. And yes, I know Leica does cheat a little bit with stop motion because they do enhance it with CG, but that doesn't really matter. Ultimately, what matters is that you're seeing a really neat image in your eyes. It doesn't. Who cares what they're doing to accomplish it? What matters is you're seeing this gorgeous imagery on screen. And if you're a fan of classic adventure films, The Man Who Would Be King, that's the movie I've been trying to remember for the last 5 minutes.
Oh.
This movie straight up remakes shots from that movie just to give you an epic scope. And the idea of stop motion replicating like actual nature is fascinating. And I mean, bonus points go to Emma Thompson. She has a small voice role in the movie as a character who completely throws a wrench in the movie's theme in a positive way. Because this is a movie that could have been very simple and could have been very easy to dismiss as just, a tribute to a certain genre. But when her character comes in, I don't want to give this away because there's spoilers, but when her character comes in and delivers on sort of a final blow to the mission that these guys have, it hits you with an emotional depth that you don't see in movies like this. Because you realize that their entire premise of embarking on this mission to help this guy find his long lost family, you realize how he didn't realize that this, his entire premise to begin with was flawed, and he should have looked to the family that he had been growing with as opposed to the one that he aspired to discover. Really, I mean, it's an emotional movie. I enjoyed it quite a bit, and if you have a chance to see it, I didn't see it in 3D. I don't recommend it because there's no point. 3D is a gimmick these days, for the most part. There are rare exceptions. I will give Werner Herzog his attempt, Cave of Forgotten Dreams. That was made for 3D, but it's a rare thing that 3D actually has a purpose.
Yeah.
But see this movie. This is so far one of my favorite movies of the year, and it's as with all stop motion movies, it's not getting the love that it deserves. I'm just glad that Leica is an organization that's run by Travis Knight, because he's got that Nike money behind him. So if the movie doesn't pull a profit, it's not that big a deal.
Yeah, that always helps.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think. It makes me hope that if I was ever a multimillionaire, I would support films that were of this high of quality.
Sure.
Okay, so unless you have any other thoughts on that, we can go ahead.
The only other thought I have on Missing Link was in the trailer. I didn't even know it was a Leica movie at first. Yeah, it was only towards the end that I realized, oh wait, this is a Leica movie.
Yeah.
I thought the Missing Link, the trailer was it kind of had this high end vibe to it, where it was like a higher quality version of one of those like stupid zoo movies.
It does almost like the stop motion animation has gotten to such a high level of quality, you could almost confuse it for CG at times. And it doesn't help that Leica does enhance with some CG here and there, but the core of it is still stop motion.
Okay, but what I was getting at was more like the writing. It seemed like way too goofy. It was like I was expecting them to break out in a rap dance or something.
That never happens, thankfully.
Okay, good.
This is a movie. The marketing campaign, I think, was probably trying to get it a little bit more commercial acceptance than it probably would have if you advertised it the way it really is. Because really, this movie is a throwback to classic adventure filmmaking. And it's one, I confess that's one of my favorite subgenres of film. Adventure films are sort of a thing of a bygone era, because nowadays the entire globe is well known, and it's very seldom to have a movie that shows you things you didn't know about the world that we live in.
Yeah.
And really throw it into full relief. And that's the thing. It's the old stereotype of we're going on a journey to darkest Africa. Okay. and you can't really do stuff like and you can't do stuff like that anymore. And it was a great way of seeing the adventure of the unknown. That's why the Lost World of the Lost City of Zed is still one of the premier movies, in my opinion, of the last decade. And it's just I enjoy a good epic, and this movie manages to give epic qualities to 90 minutes of cinema.
All right, cool.
So, with that said, we're going to move on to the next film on this list, and I'm going to let you monologue for a moment, because I honestly do have to use the washroom. So, talk about Her Smell.
There's like no way of talking about this movie without making that joke. Like, talk about her smell, and like, well, she stinks. No, actually, she doesn't stink. Elizabeth Moss is absolutely fantastic in this movie. She's brave. She's courageous. She's angry. She's full range. Her Smell is the latest film from Alex Ross Perry, filmmaker behind Golden Exits, The Color Wheel, Listen Up, Philip, Impolex, and what was the Queen of Earth, which was also a Elizabeth Moss starring movie. Which she was that movie was weird, but it was also like it was like almost like a weird horror movie, but a horror movie of relationships. If one can describe relationships in such a way, like I don't mean anyone got stabbed, but I mean it certainly felt like you were watching the death of something happen on screen, and that was entirely heartbreaking. Her Smell takes place in the 1990s, throughout the 90s, I think a little bit into the 2000s. Follows a punk girl band by the name of Something She. And it's led by Becky Something, played by Elizabeth Moss. I believe this movie has 5 acts, or at least that's how it's billed. Something like that, where it's like there are basically 5 segments throughout. Like the first one is The band kind of near the end of their peak. The second one is them recording another album, but you can see their downfall. The third act is, or the third segment rather, is Becky's hitting the fucking bottom of the lake as hard as anyone could.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth segment would be her beginning recovery, and the fifth one, her big comeback special where she may or may not lose it. We're not sure. There's definitely this. I guess raw is the best way to describe it. This raw
WWF Raw?
No, not WWF Raw. If you
Or
want
E.
or E, yeah, if you want goofy cartoonishness, then yeah, I guess it would be Raw. But no, this is more like emotionally sensitive. Like she's very Elizabeth Moss's Becky Something is a very raw nerve of a performance. You know, like you touch her, she feels everything. You know, like just one little prick, just one little boom, and bam, she goes off. You know, it's interesting how it's shot. It's almost like it's not a single take movie, but it almost feels like it could have been. We see most of the movie takes place backstage, you know, in the green rooms and you know, in intimate environments, not necessarily always on stage. There's only like maybe 2-3 scenes that take place on stage, and it's for a very short while.
Does it have a documentary feel to it?
It kind of felt like The Wrestler, which was shot with a documentary kind of edge to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not shot by the same person. That was shot by Maurice Alberti. I forget who shot this movie for Alex Ross Perry, but whoever did it, I would imagine used a Steadicam.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely was bobbing and weaving between people and actors and everyone, you know, and walls and settings, you know, as much as they could, you know. We see the band, Something She go from the highest possible place or near the highest place they could have gone to. It's more like the band made it, but they could have gone higher had Becky not been so destructive to herself and to everyone around her. No matter how much of hot shit she feels like she is a black hole that everything, including light and gravity, will get sucked into. And coming out the other end is not a good experience. In the beginning of the movie, it's revealed that she has a daughter that she just, I guess, most recently gave birth to, probably like a couple months, maybe a year ago, at that point. And she has a husband an ex-boyfriend who's the father, played by Dan Stevens, whose character name I think is like Dirtbag Daryl. Like that's his band, that's his like musician name. They're all musicians.
Like Dimebag Daryl?
Yeah, that's kind of what it reminded me of. But I don't think it was. I think he's like more punk, not metal or anything. And and so we see that she has like a fucking religious or some kind of voodoo priest shaman that always follows her at these gigs to be her like spiritual advisor. And she's like, they're working on the chakras and the auras of the room and stuff. And, you know, everyone's like, what the fuck are you talking about? And, you know, her bandmates are like, just let her go through it with it. It's harmless, whatever, you know. But all the while, Becky is vile in these scenes. She's like yelling at people. She's telling people to go fuck off, you know. She's throwing beer bottles and booze and all sorts of shit. Not so much in that scene, but later in the movie, in the middle, she really gets violent. Not just physically violent, but emotionally violent, just wringing out her friends and her family and everyone while thinking she's on top of the world. She could do this if she wanted to, and she is. It's definitely a different kind of movie from Alex Ross Perry, but at the same time, Well, it feels like a different kind of movie, but I guess on the surface, it really is the same kind of, following like narcissistic people, or people that are miserable in some
Right.
ways. Like all those movies kind of involve someone that's going through trauma, or think they're going through trauma, or someone who thinks very highly of themselves, or people who are depressed and don't know it, or maybe who are depressed and do know it but think their shit don't stink, that kind of thing.
Right.
But this one, I would say, is more accessible than probably any of his other films are. Um, Even though it has that 5 segments only kind of structure, and each segment's like maybe 30 minutes or so long. Like this movie is like almost 2.5 hours. And each segment of her life, it's really interesting how it's structured, because you get a VHS diary of the band getting their first gold record, and then it cuts to the first segment of the movie, then it cuts to another diary entry, then another segment later on in their lives, and then another segment, and so on and so forth until the recovery aspect.
Hard to believe this is the same person who co-wrote Christopher Robin.
Well, I mean, I think Alex Ross Perry, to feed himself, has to take on screenwriting projects and stuff. He can't just like he actually got upset that this movie, like I made this movie for the right amount of money, and I made it, and it's excellent and everything, and no one wanted it.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's getting released in a few theaters, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
It'll go on VOD probably very soon, and it's got to be disappointing for him, because I guess he thought like this is the kind of independent film that should be heralded and should be shown all over, and I would have to agree with that. But maybe it's not the right time. Like either the time for that kind of independent film is over, or it's gonna come back in a couple years, but it's not there right now.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like now it's like, big budget blockbuster guaranteed franchises, and then maybe in the corner in one of the little screening rooms there might have like 1 or 2 independent films.
Mm-hmm.
In the theater. And that's if that theater, that corporate chain theater, has an independent programming. So Her Smell, I wrote in my letterbox initially that Perry's been more interesting in the past than here. Here, I kind of felt like he was more, like I said before, accessible. Like this was more, if you could call any of his work average, this might be closer to that. And but thinking about it some more, I'm like, that's kind of harsh actually to say about it, especially a filmmaker like him. I mean, I think he's excellent, and I think he's made some really good movies and stuff. And this is a really well edited film too, edited by Robert Greene, who's the director of Bisbee 17 and Kate Plays Christine. So that this is a movie of talent for sure, but I guess I guess I didn't connect with it as much as I thought I was going to, because I felt that it was pulling at my heartstrings a little too easily.
Right.
Like not exploiting me, but it definitely tearjerker in a tearjerker kind of way. Like it was almost like manufactured for those purposes at times. On second thought, though, I really want to revisit the film and give it a much better chance. I gave it like 3.5 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd, but honestly, I could probably go a little higher. It's a great performance, a singular performance from Elizabeth Moss. She is fire and brimstone here, more so than in Queen of Earth. That movie, while you were away, I called I referred to it as like a horror movie about a female relationship, but without the slasher aspects. Like no one dies, but a relationship dies, and emotionally a connection dies, and that's kind of a horror by itself, in a different kind of respect. This is more like that downfall of a musician, then the upswing, the slight upswing that comes afterwards when they go through recovery. It's kind of like that, but he does push at the right buttons, and so does Moss. They both push at the right moments where you think Becky something is gonna go back to her old ways, and will she? Won't she? What she's gonna do next? That kind of stuff. The movie tries to have a hopeful ending, but I got this really heavy sense that it was more wishful thinking. Like Becky's like, I'm done. I'm not going to do this stuff anymore. But yeah, I guess it's a spoiler. But that's if anyone's even going to see it. It's barely been released, so I mean, I guess it's not much of a spoiler. But I got this heavy sense that Becky could very well go on the other end. Go back to her old ways if she, if pointed in that direction. She's a very sensitive and person, and it could really go either way. It's not as clean cut. Like, okay, I'm done. I got it all out of my system. I'm back to being a human. It's more like, am I? Like that kind of thing.
Ambiguous.
Very ambiguous. It's got an ambiguous feeling to it. Even though she states it like a proclamation, you feel it in your gut that this isn't a proclamation, really. It's more of a, I hope I'm doing this right, kind of thing. And you kind of wonder, where's Becky something down the road? What's she going to be like later in the next decade? So yeah, I would definitely recommend this movie. If you can see it, go see it. It's got a nice cameo, or not a cameo, I guess a supporting role from Eric Stoltz, who you don't really see in too many movies anymore. But I guess you don't have to. I would imagine he can afford to take a break if he wants to, from acting. He did a lot of that in the 80s and stuff. So, I mean, he can do whatever the hell he wants. Kind of like...
not quite Michael J. Fox, though. He did get cut out of that.
Yeah, I know, but... but this movie's got great performances. It's got great music, great editing, great photography, pretty good direction, or even great direction, actually. That's the part I'm a little wishy-washy on. I'm not sure about. But yeah, it's just a shame that movies like this get the shaft often, and I'm thankful for distributors like Gunpowder and Sky, who are the ones releasing this. But I just wish they had more of a wider release,
Right.
Not necessarily every theater, but definitely more cities. So that's my take.
All right. Well done. We'll go ahead and move on from her smell to the best of enemies.
Now this is one I haven't seen it, but give me a second.
You okay?
Drinking a little bit of water. Yeah. Sorry, I was in the middle of it, and I was like, I gotta get into my 2 bets first. But oh wait, I really want to drink this water. I've read lots of reviews, like from Shadow and Act, The Root, a couple other places. I think like Vox and a few other places that this movie is kind of like. It spotlights the wrong people and gives the wrong coverage to, like I said, to the wrong people. While, for example, the black activists are
this movie may as well have been called Talking Point the movie.
Okay,
and that's not to say anything negative about the movie itself. It's more like this is the kind of movie that, unfortunately, if it had come out in, say, 1995, it would have been seen as like a forward-thinking, progressive story. But telling the exact same story that it tells now, it's seen as backwards. And I can understand that, because there have been so many movies telling this sort of story, the reconciliation between the races story. It's completely understandable, because the unfortunate thing about this story is the more interesting arc is the arc of the white racist character. And that's the problem that people are pointing out in this movie, is that Anne Atwater, played by Taraji P. Henson, had a very fascinating life story as well. And the movie does give her a lot of screen time, but really C.P. Ellis, played by Sam Rockwell, is the primary focus of the movie. And I would argue, honestly, when you're telling this specific story from both of their lives, I don't understand why people are complaining about it being a problem, because quite frankly, he's the one who has the big arc. He's the racist, card-carrying Ku Klux Klan member who decides within a period of about 10 days that he doesn't want to be that anymore. And that actually happened in real life. So you know what? That's kind of fascinating. With that said, before I go into talking about the quality of the movie itself, I'm going to say that I would have much preferred seeing a documentary about these events than a dramatization, because I'd like to see in their own words what happened during this time frame.
I think some of the behind the scenes videos I saw of this did have archival footage of Anne Atwater and C.P. Ellis. So there is, material out there that could have been culled together into a documentary.
Oh yeah, and I'm sure there's probably one out there for all I know. I don't know of any, but
yeah, me neither.
So I'll just give a quick synopsis here. In 1971, the Durham, North Carolina school district experienced kind of a crisis, because legally they were supposed to desegregate. That just didn't happen in a lot of places in the South for a while. The reason being, the schools were established the way they were, and the argument that was made very often is, it would take more time and more school resources to desegregate them. And so it just didn't happen. And in 1971, there was a fire in one of the African-American schools. And when that happened, suddenly you found a whole neighborhood worth of black kids who didn't have a school to go to. And so the idea was, where are we going to send these kids? So anyway, the school, it was a much talked about issue. And eventually what was determined was that they were going to hold a sort of town hall meeting of sorts at the where basically they brought in some community leaders and from both sides of the issue, and they were going to vote on the matter after a period of discussion and debate, seeing both sides of the issue. And what was kind of a brilliant idea that they had at the time was, why don't we bring in and force to be around the two most active community leaders on the most extreme sides of this issue. You had Anne Atwater, who was a civil rights activist who was known for her very leftist, forward-thinking, moving up behavior, and very, very left-wing in its own way. And then you had C.P. Ellis, the textbook definition of a racist white guy, who was the head of his chapter of the Ku Klux Klan, the president of it. He was, what's the word, Grand Cyclops or something like that?
Bunch of losers.
Oh, yeah. They got to make up some names that make themselves sound special.
What's funny about this when you're describing it, I can already tell you there's already an inherent problem, and not with the movie, but with the scenario. Like, just back then, there's already
exalted Cyclops.
It's not just that; it's also it's the Cyclops thing.
I had to look up the special name.
That kills me, but no, it's the idea that both sides of the issue are equally valid, when really it's one side that is wrong and one side that is right.
Well, I agree with you, but here's the thing. And by the way, the name of this community meeting, it was sort of an experimental concept called the charrette.
Okay.
And I've actually just pulled that up to get a specific definition. A charrette is a period of planning activity, an intense one. And so its use in this case, it was sort of an experimental concept with which you get, basically it's getting community leaders involved and forcing them to be with each other and learn from each other. And really, even though the charrette is designed to bring people together on both sides, they make it pretty clear in the movie, at least. I can't speak for the actual incident since I haven't seen a documentary on the matter or read anything on it. But, well, beyond a Wikipedia entry or two, that the idea was that the guy who was running this charrette knew that if you get these people in the room, particularly these really racist rednecks, and force them to interact with these Black community leaders for a while, you would see that there's a lot that they have in common, and that those commonalities would forge bonds where they would realize that a lot of their deeply seated, long-held beliefs about each other are ultimately not that important. The truth is, these are people, and people of the same, people driven by similar passions, the passions for their family and their community. And there was a documentary that came out a couple of years ago. I forget the name of it, but it's a bit. I'm terrible with names right now, but it's the true story of this guy who's kind of he's a musician, but he's also he's got a very unusual hobby, and that hobby is he's a Black musician, but he meets with Ku Klux Klan members and tries to befriend them.
Oh yeah, I've heard of this documentary. I think it's on Netflix right now. And the documentary deals with the weird conundrum that a lot of fellow progressives have with him, in that they feel like he's not taking a hard enough stance against racism because he's trying to befriend these people who hate him. And it does. I think there's a fair argument to be made on both sides, because quite frankly, yes, on one hand, a person who is a member of a racist organization does deserve every bit the anger and the resentment that comes from the years and years of inbuilt hatred that they have formed and repression that they have been responsible for. But the truth is, if you're going to get people to understand you, befriending them isn't a bad idea. And yes, they may have these racist beliefs, but the more you get to know them, you're kind of shedding you're shedding away this divide that you've had with them. And in doing that, some understanding is bound to happen. Now, this movie takes a very basic and very mainstream approach to that. I think this movie is being very fairly compared to Green Room, in that it is a very Green Book.
Green goddamn
Green Room, the punk Nazi.
Completely different. Actually, that's a great way to deal with Nazis. Kill them.
Isn't that what Hitchcock said about fascism? Here's my cure for fascism. It's a bullet. It can fit in a gun.
Very good point. But no. Truthfully, Green Book is a good comparison, because Green Book is a very solidly acted, performed movie with a story that is a little behind its times in what it's trying to say. Because there have been a lot of films that have come before it that have said the same thing. And I completely buy that. And that's why a documentary would have been more interesting on this subject. With that said, as mainstream and conventional as The Best of Enemies is, the core of this movie is the performances, much like the core of Green Book was the performances. I would argue that Mahershala Ali and particularly Viggo Mortensen have seldom been better in any movies they've done. They've had some great performances, but they were really a great pairing. And this movie is another movie with a great pairing. Taraji P. Henson is one of the most underrated actresses in Hollywood, partially because she very often is the best part of otherwise mediocre films. And in some cases, the best part of otherwise horrifyingly bad movies. It's sad to say, but, you know, What Men Want, mediocre. Acrimony, terrible. Proud Mary, terrible. Hidden Figures, better, but still not great. In fact, that movie is another movie you could lump into this category of, you know, of racial civil rights era movies that have kind of a, you know, they're a little behind their times in terms of what they're trying to say.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the performances in that movie are solid. And as Anne Atwater, she's a fiery character, and she put her heart and soul into her performance in this movie.
Now, isn't there a little bit of trivia about her performance here? Like, didn't she request that she got Medea's boobs?
Oh, God.
For the costume?
I have not heard that. That sounds amazing. And Anne Atwater was a heavier set woman, so that's possibly true. Especially since Taraji P. Henson's worked with Tyler Perry, so she might have
had easy access to that. Yeah.
You know what? I'm not props. That's so opposite from the point I was trying to make in this. The point is her performance.
It almost relates to that point because
I can see practical reasons why she would request something like that.
Okay, so there's some practicality there, but at the same time, what Medea represents and what Tyler Perry represents, and then you cross that with this movie and her performance and costume, you know, it doesn't feel right, you know.
I'll be honest. Speaking as a heavyset person myself, I've seen pictures of Anne Atwater and I've seen videos of her, and she was definitely a larger woman. And that, you know, that's not to criticize her in any way, because I myself have the same problems. The truth is that if you're going to portray that, you probably have to appear larger than you are, unless you are, you know. I mean, yes, I guess there's gonna be the people who criticize they should have cast a bigger woman.
That's not what I'm getting.
That's not acting. To me, acting is casting someone who can deliver the performance that's best for the role. And Taraji P. Henson nails it in this movie.
Okay.
So that I'll say. And then I've talked about her second, you know, her compliment in this movie is Sam Rockwell as C.P. Ellis, this is easily one of Sam Rockwell's best performances as an actor, because he truly has a very difficult task of being an empathetic racist. And he manages to pull it off, because he pulls off this guy who has a lot of family connections that you can see how he became what he became, even if you don't agree with it. And while you don't ever accept his beliefs for what they are, it's watching him come to terms with it and making the decision, the admirable decision that he does. Because this happened in real life before. I mean, he went on stage on the last day of this charrette. Spoiler alert: he tore up his Ku Klux Klan card in front of the world and voted in favor of integration of the school. And that's a ballsy move. He immediately got himself on the hit list of the organization of people who he called friends just days before that. And you know what? I understand that there are movies that deal with racism in a much more modern way. I would say, for instance, If Beale Street Could Talk is a great example of a movie that handles it in a very modern way that says a lot more than films like this have to say, because movies like this had their time. The problem with a movie like this coming out nowadays is there are movies out there that are more thought-provoking. I just can't, for the life of me, take too much away from a movie that contains such solid performances as that of Taraji P. Henson and Sam Rockwell in this movie. And you know what? I mean, if it means giving this movie 3 beers out of 6-pack as opposed to 4 or 5, I'll do that. I think this is a solid 3-beer movie. It'll never make 2 beers. It'll never make toast just because it's behind the times in terms of its themes, but its performances are incredible. And you know what? I think it's shameful to take that away from 2 actors who just put their all into making an emotional performance, and they rise above the mediocre material of the movie.
Okay, I believe you.
Right. I don't need to sell this any further.
You sold me.
Yeah. So let's talk about jizz. It would be a perfect time to just hit stop broadcast.
Might as well, actually, because my thoughts on High Life are probably going to be a little different than everyone else's.
Go ahead.
Although I'm willing to give the movie another chance. Not to say it to, like, oh, in my eyes it needs another chance. Like, I'm so high and mighty, but High Life is the story, and it's a non-linear story. It begins in the middle. We see the beginning later, and then the ending, and that kind of thing. It jumps from time, time in the timeline, but it's all the same timeline. It's just it jumps around. Stars Robert Pattinson and Juliette Binoche and Mia Goth, and I believe Andre 3000's in this. His name's Andre Benjamin, right? Ken? Oh, you're off. Okay.
Oh, sorry about that. Yes, I think you're right.
Okay. Okay, so they star in this movie, and the movie's about a kind of a space experiment that on Earth, it's established that on Earth they've enacted some kind of a law for some reason. It's not really specified exactly why. I think it's to get for the purpose of using guinea pigs in order to get resources for the Earth. They get these young death row inmates and prisoners, put them on a ship with a scientist or two, and send them off to a black hole, or near a black hole anyways, where they will collect information and data that could lead to unlimited energy resources for the Earth. And while on their way to this black hole, which is going to take a little bit of time, even though they're going pretty fast, it's going to take a little bit of time. Of course, relativity will kick in, and they will age slower than people on Earth, and that kind of thing. While they're on the ship, they will be subjected to reproductive experiments. That is to say, experiments regarding the reproductive system.
That is to say, fucking.
Well, actually, there is no fucking in this movie.
Oh.
That's the thing. It's all masturbation.
Oh,
or insemination.
Oh no.
There is fucking with a machine. Oh, actually, there is fucking in this movie. It's just one. It's just one scene of fucking, but it's more like one-sided. It's rape.
Oh
basically.
God.
But I'll get into anyone who's listening to this. I'll get into spoilers just to clarify a few things. But it trust me, it's not that big of a deal. The spoilers, because the movie's kind of loopy and non-linear. Of course it is. It's made by French filmmaker Claude Denis, or Claire Denis. I'm sorry, I don't know why I say Claude. It's a female filmmaker. This is her first English language film. I can't say anything's been lost in translation when it comes to the language barrier. I would imagine she knows English. I've never listened to an interview of hers. I'm sorry. I feel like a Philistine for saying that. I know she's highly revered in the film critic world. But this is her first film that I've seen. I feel terrible saying that too, but I have access to her films now. I believe some of them are on the Criterion channel. Mm-hmm. Well, anyways, so the jizz kicks in because Juliette Binoche is a scientist who studies reproductive systems, and she has the male prisoners, now shipmates on the ship, masturbate for her in another room. Like they don't show it, but you do hear it. And then she'll take their fluid, give them like a treat, like a drug, because some of them were like drug addicts, and then she'll study the semen, and then she'll study the eggs, and see if they can produce a baby in space that can deal with the radiation and that can deal with the elements and all that stuff. And so far, all the experiments have failed. Robert Pattinson plays a character who is going celibate. He sees this space adventure as an opportunity to better himself. He's like, look, we're probably not getting back to Earth, so I might as well work on myself while I'm here. I gotta work on my Tinder profile, man. No, he's gonna better himself, and he decides not to take part in the reproductive aspect, but he will work on the ship. He will be handy, and that kind of guy. So he's completely, like, they call him like monk because he acts like a monk in a way, in that respect, in that no sex respect. Juliette Binoche has this the scientist has kind of an affection towards him, and it's clear that she's sexually frustrated as well. On top of everything else, there's this machine that they refer to in the film as the fuck box. And I'm not kidding. That's what it's called, the fuck box, where we see an extended sequence of Juliette Binoche arming a dildo with and puts a condom over it and gets naked and starts grinding on this dildo to like this weird flute music or something. It's hard to describe what it is. I'm trying to remember exactly how the music goes. It's like and she's like grinding. She's like, oh yeah, doing her thing, and then afterwards, this fluid comes out of the machine room, which it's weird because it's supposed to be semen, but it's not. It doesn't make sense why it would be semen in this case because it's her. It's just her in the room. Now the guys can go in the room if they want to, and they can, do their thing, and then that it will release whatever they gave into it. But in her case, this was the confusing part. Like, she's the only person in there. Why was it releasing fluid? Unless it's, female ejaculate, I guess. But it was just urine. Well, I don't know, but it was confusing, is what it was. So anyway, the movie kind of. There's this garden in the movie where they have plants growing and food and stuff like that, and it's kind of has this feel of like this is a microcosm in this ship, these prisoners, the scientist, this garden, the sex experiments, all of these things are kind of coalescing into this microcosm of I guess humanity. I guess that's what the movie's trying to get at, like the different sins, if you will, or not even sins, just the different pleasures and pains and birth and death and all sorts of stuff that's lofty and sometimes boring and, to like I've seen this 1,000 times. I don't know. I wasn't terribly impressed by the movie. In fact, I was mostly confounded by it. I didn't want to pull my hair out. I did appreciate what it was doing, but I at the same time wasn't terribly impressed. I felt like what it was doing I had already seen in other forms and done better. But I appreciate its fixation on jizz. I will give it that. Like that's they go all the way with that. There's a sequence where Juliette Binoche has drugged the prisoners on the ship, the men and the women, and I don't know. She's in kind of a daze, and I don't know if she's drugged herself or not or what. But she goes into Robert Pattinson's room, pulls his penis out. We don't see it, but she starts riding him, and has sex with him while he's like drugged and asleep. And then she squirts out his, onto the floor, or onto her hand rather. And then she goes into another room, puts it in a syringe, inseminates a female on the ship, and is successful in producing a baby, which we jump to later. Like the movie jumps time, we don't see like the pregnancy and stuff like that. And the movie basically is Pattinson trying to survive in space after everyone else dies from one by one different circumstances. Juliette Binoche kills herself by throwing herself into the vacuum of space. A couple other characters do other stupid stuff like blow themselves up or fly into the black hole or just die from disease or something. I believe Andre Benjamin actually lets the garden eat him, which makes no sense at all because it's not like there's a man-eating plant there. He just lets the dirt consume him.
So he buries himself?
He buries himself basically over time, but he lets the dirt do the work basically.
Okay.
So the movie's very fucking like, I don't want to say, I'm trying not to say the word bad because it's not really bad, but it is like a little too artsy for its own fucking good.
Okay. So it's up its own ass a little bit?
It's a bit up its own ass, but I almost want to say it's up its own urethra.
Oh God.
It's up into the balls. I mean, I guess the consistency of jizz, right? I guess, I don't know. It's a little too watery, but it seems like it's sticky enough. I don't know I don't know. I don't want to I'd rather not get into all that, but I just did. So I would say it gets that right, and it gets space kind of right, like Space Madness a little bit. But the movie's also just weird and not in a terribly good way. Although I appreciate movies that get weird. So, like I said, there's stuff to appreciate. I guess I'll get into the ending real quick. He's been on the ship for like fucking decades now at this point. He's the only one left of the original members. It's just him and his child, and his child is now a teenager. And he and her decide to get into the last pod and head off into the black hole and see what happens. So they head off into the black hole, and then it ends with them looking at each other and going, "Are you ready?" And then that's it. The movie cuts to black. So shitting the bed, the term shitting the bed has come up often on the show, but I can't say that works here because I don't know if there was much of a bed to begin with throughout. And I feel horrible saying this because this is a movie that's highly revered. It's been getting lots of praise, and I'm almost like, what am I missing?
Right.
What dots did I not connect? What did I not understand here? Like, people make fun of the jizz aspects. Don't get me wrong. I've read those funny retorts and stuff, just like what we've done here. But they also acclaim the film for it as a masterpiece and all sorts of stuff. And I'm like, well, I'm kind of split. I mean, I'm like, yeah, it's got some great photography. It's got some great cinematography and all. And Pattinson is great in it. He really is. He's very good. He's been doing a lot of these weird movies, and I think that's a good thing for him. A very good thing. He stretches beyond what we thought he was capable of, and now he's showing that he's really one of our best and brightest young actors. But here, he's not wasted. It's just the movie around him is kind of, like we said, up its own ass. Like it thinks it's smarter than it is, I guess. Well, I don't know. I kind of want to see it a second time, so I'm waiting for for it to become rentable, like on Amazon or something, so I can just analyze it a little more thoroughly, but I found myself most of the time just laughing.
Okay.
You know, I was like, oh my God, the fuck box? What's the purpose of this shit? You know, and I was the only one in the theater. Everyone else was just kind of like, what the hell's going on?
Right.
And there were other people in the theater. Don't get me wrong. There were people seated for this movie. And I think they were going, oh, this is a French masterpiece or something. And I'm sitting there like, there's just a lot of semen. Like that's something, but it's not like, you know, it's not it's not the kind of gravy I was expecting, you know what I mean? So so I'm split on this movie. I gave it on Letterboxd 2.5 out of 5. But I probably could have gone lower, but I ended up sticking with 50-50 because of Pattinson, because of the cinematography, and because I felt like maybe there was something I wasn't getting. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I needed to pay even closer attention. I'm not sure. So I'm going to give it another shot later when I can, when it becomes more readily available. And, you know, I'll see where we're at then. But yeah, for now, it's just this weird, confounding movie that, like I said, feels way smarter than it probably is. But maybe it is. I don't know.
Well then, I think that's
maybe we should have had hit stop after. So Bill, jizz.
yeah. Well, it's an interesting note to end this episode on, and some food for thought. I'm not sure if I'm gonna
some protein for thought.
Oh God, I'm not sure I'm ever gonna watch this movie, but if I do, I will certainly report back my thoughts on it.
I think you should, just for the gimmick.
Next week is probably going to be a one-movie episode because next week is Avengers Endgame. And
oh yeah. There's I might see. I rented The Man Who Killed Don Quixote.
Oh, really?
On Amazon, yeah, the Terry Gilliam. So I can talk a little bit about that next week.
I didn't know that was rentable yet. I'm gonna have to check that out.
Yeah, they did a one-night screening of it through what's that company that does those like riff tracks? Yeah, Adam, like events, yeah, that kind of thing. It was they did one of those things, and it's also getting another theatrical run, at least near me. But I found out the other day that it was rentable. I was just scrolling through Amazon and I saw it on there, and I thought, oh, I gotta pick this up. It was like $6.99
right
to rent. So I thought, all right, what the hell, you know? So I'm gonna check that out, and there's probably like one or two other movies that I can watch, you know. So we'll convene on that later. But yeah, Endgame is the big one, and I think I may have already spoiled it for myself.
No, don't go into it then.
I'm not getting into any of it, but
let me make a prediction in advance.
Yes.
All those people who disappeared.
Oh.
They're coming back.
That's a good prediction, is all I'm going to say. That's a very good prediction. Yeah, no, I didn't see any clips, but I did read, and I get anxious about a movie. I get interested in a movie like this, and I'm like, you know what? They may have lost something in the writing of the synopsis or of the plot details, so it's not full spoilers, because when I go see the movie, I may, you know, catch something that they didn't, you know, write about.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be very interesting nonetheless. I'm still very excited. I'm catching it tomorrow night at 6 my time, which is also 6 your time.
Yeah.
So I'm catching it as early as possible. And man, theaters are going crazy about this movie. They're showing it at all times of the day and night.
Yeah.
You know, it's selling out.
It's a lot better than what they did back when, like, Star Wars Episode 1 came out, where they just kept their same hours and just had lines out the door. Just have more showings.
I know. I went to a midnight screening of that, though, on its premiere night, and people were asleep in my theater, that like snoring loudly. And I was like, Mom, what do we do about this? And she was like, just let them sleep, honey. And I was like, okay. But I even with that, I had a hard time following the movie. I was like, wait, so it's about taxes?
Yeah, like, basically.
What the fuck? You know, why isn't it about the Jedi and the Sith and the man?
Yeah.
You know. Well, anyways, that's Endgame. Looking forward to it. Should be pretty cool. Hopefully.
I'm looking forward to seeing Thanos: The Hands of Fate.
That joke's been done so many times.
I know. But
it's a good one.
It's the one who invented it, because I didn't hear a single damn person make that joke until I started making it.
It's a good joke, though. It really is. Thanos: The Hands of Fate.
I just want Torg to show up.
The master wants you, but he can't have you.
And then that guy killed himself.